Deaths of black and brown people at the hands of police. To honour him today and in the future, we must continue to fight for justice. The global impact of George Floyd's death must not be allowed to fade. We take the need to remember all those murdered by a corrupt system. George Floyd's life was brutally cut short. 6-year-old Gianna Floyd said, "Daddy changed the world." We must continue that change. We must never stop fighting for change. We must never stop fighting for justice. Thank you.
Thanks so much for that. And so right that to close with saying that actually we must continue to fight, and that's what today is about, that continuation of the fight for justice and for real change. That's what today is all about. So I want to introduce my next speaker. It's Liz Cameron. Liz has been an active supporter and activist within Stand Up to Racism now for many years. She's also, is it the Northwest? I'm going to get the right honour. I'm going to let Liz introduce you.
Hi everybody, I'm really pleased to be with you here today. I think the title that she was struggling with there was that I'm chair of the GMCA, Greater Manchester Combined Authority Race Equality Plan. Well, anyone can know, if you get a remit like that, you may as well say it's impossible. We, from last year, let me start at the beginning. As I stand here as a trade unionist for 25 years, we have been fighting for rights in the workplace for black workers. We fight the same issues today as we were fighting 25 years ago. And sadly, my parents also fought 50 years ago. So when we started to say Black Lives Matter, it unearthed the arguments that we'd already been making. The arguments that said, why have we become invisible in the workplace? And we wanted to be visible because we wanted to say, yes, black lives do matter. And anybody who says all lives matter, yeah, we get that. But the fact is, you've not been showing Black Lives Matter. You haven't been showing it because in the workplace, you know when you look around you, if there's only one black person, something's going wrong here. This is the diversity of our community. So what's going wrong? When have you said something? When have you sat in a tea break and heard that uncomfortable joke and not challenged it? When have you been in the pub and heard it and just thought, it's too much? Or you're ostracised because you are the one that takes it on. And people wonder what the hell's wrong with them? And there were some very nasty names that went with liking black people. You know, the N-lover always came out. And so, it came a time when we said, no more, no more. When somebody could be killed in front of our eyes, if people weren't going to take action then, when were they going to take action? And thank God we did, we mobilised, we came together, movements that maybe didn't communicate with each other before, realised that we have a common aim. And I walked shoulder to shoulder with 14,999 other people last year when we did the march through Manchester to say that Black Lives Matter. And it was all of us, young and old, because we recognise that in our society we don't want this anymore. We will not sustain these systems which perpetuate the lives that black people come to live. The reasons that black people are more predominantly dying from COVID. Why is that? People started to keep a distance from you as if they were going to catch it more from you. Islamophobia went through the roof. Chinese people were backing away from them. A chippy close to me decided to rename its Chinese curry Irish curry because nobody would buy it anyway. I mean, this is appalling. It's appalling, and we must say no to all of it. We call out every single incident. That's when it changes. When we look at everything that's happening in our lives, in our education system, we see it. When did a black person learn about their own education? When did you get empowered enough to feel that we were more than slaves? When did you realise we had a rich history that deserved for us to stand tall and not remember Sambo or the Golden Rock or the Marmalade Jar or any of those ostracising names and jokes, nut-soul hazelnuts and the monkey chants and the bananas on desk. Absolute overt racism in our faces, and we shied away. So the difference that's happening now is that we've recognised we're not going to let this go anymore, and we will call it out where it exists. And it is the one that makes the difference, because it's all of us as one that make the whole. And that is why, and when I'm told, you know, I have been a strong supporter of Stand Up to Racism, and I have heard countless reasons why I should be. But from my point of view, somebody who stood up and recognised my situation, the fact that a young black man can be tasered 4 times more likely to be tasered, 9 times more likely to be stopped and searched. A young black man gets murdered with a knife, and the person who does it gets 4 months for possession of a knife because he's white and privileged. No, sorry, it was time to recognise this. So we heard some names. We heard about white privilege. We heard about our heritage and recognised that we as black people had a right, the same right as anyone else, to stand tall and stand alongside brothers and sisters who appreciated what we were saying and were going to take the fight forward. So I thank everybody being here today. I thank you so much, Wheeler, for always giving me the opportunity to give voice to the workers' experience and the experience of women being completely at the bottom of the ladder. Black women always will be. That's why equal pay will never be eradicated, because poverty pay is something that we turn a blind eye to. So my message is, please don't turn a blind eye. It only takes every single one of us where we are to stop turning a blind eye to make a difference and eradicate racism for good. Thank you.
Thanks so much for that. Okay, my next speaker is from another trade union that has been long supporting Stand Up to Racism and stood alongside us as we've campaigned over the years. It's Mama Shafiq, who is, I think, the chair of Black members, PCS Black members. You want to come over and say a few words?
Hi Nyla, hi everyone, great to be here. I'm Mohammed Shafiq, I'm chair of the PCS National Black Members Committee here representing my union, and as always we're very keen to stand up to racism. Every step of the way you've been there, you've campaigned, you've been vigorous, and you've always been committed to raising the voice against injustice wherever we see it around the world, and so it's great to be here. And what an extraordinary year it's been since that brutal night where George Floyd was murdered, and it's a significant moment, I think, not just for America, where there was a reckoning about social justice and equality, but also the lived experience.
Keep getting killed and no one is accountable. That's why we need to challenge them, and that's why we're here today. Black lives do matter. I'm proud to say Unison, through its structures, has a commitment to anti-racism, and it has developed strategies, useful guidance, so stewards in the workplace can challenge racism when it happens. And even local authorities, they have race policies. But when you look around at senior management, where are the black people? Where are the percentage of the community that the local authorities are providing a service for? Are they reflected in the management? No, they are not. So there might be policies there, but each and every one of us, we need to make them accountable. We need to have the coffee break chats with our colleagues in the workplace, with by and large decent people, but think it's all right to make racist remarks. I recall when that Big Brother was on, and that Jay's, I've forgotten her surname, made remarks about Shilpa Papadam, and it started a real debate in the workplace, and people were saying, oh, she's not racist. Well, I beg to differ. That is a racist remark. When you make a comment to humiliate an individual, to make them feel small, that is racism. That is white privilege. It does exist, and we need to call it out wherever it is. And I think people are entitled to a learning curve. But having a commitment to anti-racism doesn't mean you have to like me. It means you have to understand what we're asking for is not special treatment. It's about treat us with respect in an equal way, in an equitable way. Nothing more, nothing less. I mean, what about all those young people suddenly having to pay thousands of pounds for visas to stay in this country? And what about all the fishing raids where black communities work in takeaways in bars? They target black Commonwealth citizens. I ain't never seen nothing in no paper where they target white South African overstayers, Commonwealth young citizens, Australian Commonwealth citizens who are white, Canadian Commonwealth citizens who are white. This is a race and class issue, and we are going nowhere, and we are calling them out. And I tell you what's interesting about racism in government today. How ironic, people in government telling us institutionalised racism does not exist. Well, we're here to tell you, yes, it damn well does. And we are going nowhere, and we're going to fight together, because as black communities, we cannot win this struggle on our own. So I want to say respect to you, my white sisters and brothers, and please maintain that solidarity. Long live Palestine, and say his name! Say his name!
George Floyd!
Thank you, comrades.
Thanks so much for that, Rena. And my next speaker, again from Unison, the NEC, people will know her. She was here a few months ago campaigning against a shocking 1% pay increase for nurses. It's Karen Reisman.
Thank you very much. I suppose I want to start with George Floyd and a year ago, because I don't think anybody can have watched that film and not been absolutely horrified at the actions of those police officers, apart from racists. And I do think that it's easy to say you're a racist, but actually part of the problem is we live in a society where racism doesn't happen by accident, but it happens as a direct result of government policy, which is to actively encourage racism, to actively encourage divisions, to actively encourage us to see the differences between us as the things that are important, so that they can maintain the society where they cream off the billions and billions, and the majority of us live in poverty and struggling. And that's the role that racism plays today. And the Tory party, the Tory government, and the employers know that from the start of the great British slavery, which made Britain as great as it is, was based on racism, was based on buying and selling black people in order to make money out of them, as if they were things, not people, and used racism to justify it. And that racism continues down into the whole capitalist system that we have today, where they know that if we're busy fighting each other over the pennies on the ground, we won't be fighting over the billions that they steal time and time again. £37 billion spent on a test, track and trace system that hasn't worked from the beginning and has led to 150,000 deaths. The disproportionate number of people who were black, who were poor, who were disabled, who were elderly, people who in their minds don't matter and they don't care about. And at the same time, the people who run the companies that won those contracts are rolling in the money, rolling in the profits that they've made, and they want us to pick on people, whether it's somebody who who's got a cup of coffee with somebody else in a park somewhere, or whether it's somebody who they think might have a different colour skin and might be stealing your hospital bed or your home or your job. Well, it's not black people who steal our jobs, and it's not black people who close our hospitals and our beds, and it's not black people who don't build enough homes. The people who do that are the people who will only build a home or put you in a hospital if they think it's profitable to do so. And that's the system that we have to fight to end. And one of the ways that we do that is we have to stand up against the racism that divides us, the one that encourages us to pick on each other rather than to pick on them. And that means we do stand with George Floyd and every other black person that's been murdered by the police. We do stand with every black person at work who's disproportionately disciplined or complained against. Every migrant worker that has to risk their life crossing the sea, because if you've got money you can fly here and you're welcomed, and if you're poor and you just want to work and have a safe life for yourself, somehow that's a crime for which you're entitled to die. That sort of society has to end. Capitalism has to end, and we will do it partly by standing together. Black, white, gay, straight, men, women, all of us standing together against the horrific system in which the horrors of racism and the horrors of George Floyd's deaths grow. And that's why it's great to see this is just one of the protests that's taking place today, and it's taking place across the world to say we will not let this continue. We will fight together to make it stop until we have a socialist world that stops the horrors in which George Floyd died. Thank you.
Okay, thanks so much for that, Karen. Now I'm going to introduce our next speaker, who is a community activist, has been campaigning tirelessly. And I do want to say this. I mean, obviously we've had lots of trade union speakers, and we still have one more trade union speaker, but it is important to recognise the work that our community activists do. So I'm going to introduce Reverend Malaika.
I'm not very political, but I do love politics. I'm an interfaith minister, and I've been a community activist in the local Afro-Caribbean community in South Manchester for 36 years. And in that time, I've learned to lead.
As to what the sister was saying, the lived experience of black communities around the world. And for my sector in government, the civil service, you just have to look around the table, look around the organisation to see that we haven't made the progress that we have. And if we want our civil service and our government to be representative of wider society, it'll take, at the rate we're going, it'll take 93 years. And I don't know about you, but I don't think I'll be around in 93 years' time. So now is the time for action. And George Floyd's sacrificing his life so that we can have a better future. And this is a really important moment to commemorate his death, but also to celebrate the achievements that we've made over these past 12 months. And I just want to highlight 2 or 3 things sort of related to Stand Up to Racism, that we've taken on the narrative of the far right. It's become far too mainstream in our society, in our politics, and in our media. We've taken that on, as we've seen in the way that Islamophobia, anti-Semitism is discussed in wider society. And the second thing is, we kind of said very clearly that there is no place in Manchester for fascists and racists. I think we've got to be very clear about that. Yes, we're a family, yes, we'll disagree from time to time, but Manchester is a fascist-free zone, and long may it continue. And you know, to George Floyd's family, we thank them for all the leadership they played, because without that leadership, without perseverance, without that fight for justice, we wouldn't be where we are today. And from our union, PCS, and I think from all trade unions around the country, we're committed to that cause. That's why we're organising a review of our own black member structures to make sure that we are in touch with our black members. But solidarity, everyone, and thank you so much for coming. And you know, may the vision of George Floyd live in the work that we do in the years and weeks to come. Thank you so much.
Okay, I was just, I'm thinking, how do people feel if we actually take the knee now? And then, well, we've got a couple more speakers, but we could take the knee and then we'll carry on the speeches. Are people up for doing that? Okay, so we're going to do... It's 40. What did you... Okay, so normally, not normally, we have been told initially that we took the knee for 8 minutes 40 seconds because we told that's how long the police officer actually knelt on George Floyd's neck. We've now been told actually it was even longer. So we're going to time it, we're going to do I think it's 9 minutes 20 seconds, isn't it? Are people up for doing that? That's what we're going to do. We're going to take the knee and we'll start now.
Timing.
my heart first, before my head, to facilitate healing processes for different social and cultural groups and individuals. From campaigning for Afro-Caribbean food to be included in food provisions for black prisoners in strange ways in the late 80s and 90s. Bringing Peace Week to the streets of Old Trafford in 2008 when we had a high influx of gang crime, to most recently a founder of a Faith in Black Lives Matter regular meeting platform for people of all different faiths and none who don't understand what Black Lives Matter is and believe that all lives matter is more important. I'm here today to demonstrate the necessity of us all coming to the middle to initiate healing through deep and difficult conversations around faith for us all to ultimately one day, at the end of the spell of racism and the lineage of hatred that has been weaponized between different groups. In Africa, we call it the talking stick. We will sit together in groups and we will share our heart and then pass on the stick to someone else. The George Floyd murder was a monumental moment in world history, when for the first time in my living memory, larger numbers of people across countries, races and generations decided to take a bold stand in unison against a pattern of injustice that has long defined narratives untold for members of black communities. When I heard about the brutalisation of the murder of George Floyd, I myself was recovering from post-traumatic slavery syndrome, legacy of enduring injury and hailing, from a racial incident which took place 3 days before my son and a police officer in Alderley Edge decided to stop us and was upset because he felt that we didn't come from the area. I don't want to go into too much of it, but our car was confiscated and we were left in Alderley Edge very late one night. It would not have been the last time that we were subject to inhumane treatment from the police. As in Easter 2020, just after lockdown, many of you here would have seen an officer. He hit me, he hit my son, and he hit 5 members of the neighbours in our cul-de-sac. He also pepper sprayed a half a dozen of us and gave us all verbal abuse. That story was noted on the Priti Patel 5 o'clock COVID updates. And sadly, I've been recently told, put in a complaint, that they're not going to take the matter further because he felt threatened and he was making more noise than anybody else. I'm not going to stop, I'm still going to fight. Dealing with the aftermath of these incidents made it difficult for me to watch the George Floyd video, and I've never watched it and I don't intend to. However, I was able to create some safe spaces for groups, individuals, to have the race conversation. Something I'm good at practicing is trying to bring some form of joy from sadness and trauma. George's case was a symbol for many undocumented and unresolved cases for black people, and galvanised many of us across the races to really examine the discriminative nature of the system that we love, work and even live in. As Kiendi Andrews says, George Floyd's death is a reminder not to stay stagnant, not to stay asleep, not to allow the racism
Okay. So, George Floyd. Say his name. George Floyd. Say his name.
George Floyd.
Say his name. George Floyd. Say his name. George Floyd. Okay.
White lives matter. Black lives matter. Black lives matter.
Okay, we do have a few more speeches and then we'll be done. And I think it is so important, if anybody was in any doubt as to the fact that the police officer knew what he was doing, it wasn't a spur of the moment. Taking the knee on someone for that long gives you a real idea of just how intentional that was. And I think it's so important that when we talk about the fact that the UK is not innocent, we remember all the people that lost their lives here as well. The thousands of people that have lost their lives from COVID, in particular black people who have lost their lives, particularly those on the front line. So often we get told that actually, there are refugees, there are migrants coming to this country to take our jobs, to take the benefits. We hear so often, don't we, about the idea that, there are people coming to Britain as health tourists. Well, let's be quite honest, here in Britain, you're more likely to be treated by somebody who is a migrant. And the picture I hold up today of a nurse, this was the first nurse that died from COVID. She's a young black Muslim woman. She died working on the front line, saving other people's lives. So when the government, when the media tell you it is migrants who are to blame, let's be very clear, when we say migrants make our NHS, they literally make our NHS. And we stand in solidarity with all those frontline workers that have lost their lives, whether it's the nurses, whether it's the delivery people, whether it's the people that stock our shelves, whether people that work in transport. We stand with them today, and we recognise that actually, yes, they may have died because of COVID, but the bottom line is because of racism, institutional racism that meant they had to do those jobs, be on the front line without the appropriate PPE. And that's why we stand and we remember them today alongside all those that have lost their lives in the US and here in Britain at the hands of the police as well. So with that note, I do want to introduce our next speaker. And as I said at the beginning, this is an event that is organised by Standard to Racism, but also nationally by the TUC, and so it's really fitting that our next speaker is Evan Pritchard. He's from the Manchester Trades Council. Evan.
Thanks, Naila. Yeah, I mean, a number of the points I was going to make, Naila's just made, and in fact, I would imagine, and apologies that I was late, that if other people, that there are other people who probably made very similar points. What I will say is that I did arrive just in time to do take the knee. And I have to say, the experience, the actual pain for me at my age of kneeling on a hard ground for the amount of time that we just did it. I mean, it's only it beggars belief. In fact, it's absolutely impossible to imagine what it would have been like for George Floyd or numerous other people, mainly black people, who've been arrested and subjected to that kind of treatment. To have a big copper standing on your kneeling on your neck, I just can't imagine. And clearly, utterly unjustified use of force, as was proved. I think I think it goes without saying, in fact, that the one good thing that came out of George Floyd's death is that the already growing Black Lives Matter movement in the United States and worldwide, including in this country, became such a mass movement. And it's great on one level to see all the good and the great, corporate interests, the people in the top of football, wherever you look, all now it's completely acceptable. It's part of the common coin, if you like, that racism is something to speak out against. But what we actually need is a bit of reality. We need to understand, as Naila points out, and I think most of us do, that that such a high percentage of the people who do the key jobs in this country, that keep the country going, that keep us safe, that keep us well, are performed by migrant people, and not just migrant people, people who are not migrants, people of colour whose families have been in this country for generations. And on that, I would say, I think one of the biggest scandals, and something that I've been proud to take part in protests against on a number of occasions, is the treatment of the so-called Windrush generation. This is something that Manchester Trades Council have opposed. We've taken part in protests against that on a number of occasions. We're proud to have done that. Also, immobilising against those against that minority, but sadly far too influential minority, who want to inject racist poison into our communities in order to divide, rather than doing what the trade union movement believes in and needs to do more about. I stress, all of us do. Is to unite people, irrespective of their ethnic origin or their colour or where they came from or where their parents came from. All these things should be utterly irrelevant. We need to all unite and make the point that the trade union movement has historically made for generations, that an injury to one is an injury to all. Thank you.
Okay, so my next speaker is from the National Education Union, one of the biggest teachers' unions in the country, and I think it is really important because one of the things that we know has come from the rise of the Black Lives Matter movement, over particularly the last year, if not earlier, has been this demand for decolonising the curriculum. So I think it's great that the teachers' union are supporting the anti-racist movement and working alongside us to bring about some real change. So I want to introduce Jenny Christopher, who's from the National Education Union. Jenny.
Hi, and hello everyone. It's really heartening to see on the anniversary of George Floyd's death that there's been so much support from every individual from a diverse group. The thing that we need to be always aware of is that the issues, I mean, UK is not innocent at all in terms of Black Lives Matter. From local events, local issues that are happening in relation to institutional racism, and looking at the impact on marginalised groups, particularly black people, in terms of COVID, in terms of poverty, in terms of how the police treat us, in terms of many institutions. It's a significant problem, and as Liz had mentioned before, I thought about when my parents first came over and the issues around 60 years ago, that we're actually still experiencing that now. I think there are a range of issues that impact on us. And these are humanitarian issues. Whether we're talking about what happens locally and internationally, it's about the impact of the oppressed groups on people like Palestine, and all over the world, whether it be the UK, whether it be the US, whether it be Palestine, and all other countries. There are these marginalised groups where we need to stand together and support one another, and it's great to see that happening today. Looking at one of the other issues near to home, there's so many things I can talk about, but what I'd like to actually discuss just very briefly is about some of the issues that's occurring within our own schools. One significant issue that's arising most recently is about Palestine and how some schools are responding inappropriately to that. We're already aware of that many schools have significant issues in terms of dealing with Black Lives Matter because it's deemed as political and they actually want to shut any discussion down about just talking about racism openly in schools. There is an issue with some teachers because they fear discussing in an environment openly about issues that affect many of the black children that they teach. And hence we have a situation whereby within our own schools there isn't that opportunity to actually discuss those issues openly. We have a government that denies the existence of institutional racism, and interestingly some schools are already attempting to adopt that stance, which is absolutely appalling. We actually need a space for young people to actually discuss and share the ideas, whether it be about Black Lives Matter or even Palestine. But not only the young people need their awareness raising, but so do the adult members of staff. And so we have a long way to go. We've been developing resources to actually, within the NEU, to explore these issues. But some of those resources have not been used extensively. And the NEU are going to continue to actually work with grassroots organisations and also with schools to ensure that this issue remains clearly and overtly on the platform. One of the areas that we're also hoping to actually link with is to work with parents around the issues. And when we talk about Black Lives Matter issues, we're only talking about not just the around the curriculum. We're looking at issues in terms of the impact of racism, such as the disproportionate effects of on exclusion in our schools as well. We've also got other factors that are also entering our schools around, and this looks at classism as well as racism. And many of you may not be aware of what's happening within Greater Manchester schools about the inclusion of more school-based police officers. We don't have a very positive relationship with the police, yet Andy Burnham is actually looking at introducing more school-based police officers in our school. We don't need our classrooms criminalising, but there are so many things that are happening, and that we're hoping to raise the awareness not only with parents but with the community. All of these separate issues all intersect, they all relate to one another, because the common denominator is an oppressor who is actually oppressing others. So it just leads me to actually just go on to say that we will, and look out for the NEU, either raising awareness around decolonising the curriculum, raising awareness about engaging parents about what's happening in our schools, and looking at educating and working with everyone in all marginalised groups to actually support our aims, support our humanitarian aim that Black Lives Matter and every life matters in our international brothers and sisters and locally. Thank you.
Yay!
And yeah, it is absolutely shocking that we have police officers within our schools targeting, and we know targeting young black kids. It's an absolute disgrace. And if those young black kids are able to get through schooling, get into university, be lucky enough, probably have worked harder than any of their white sisters and brothers and got into university, we know then on university campuses we also have racial profiling. We had the incident here in Manchester. People would have heard about it, Zach, being harassed, racially profiled by security staff. But that's only the incidents that we've heard of. We know there are many, many more. And because of that, we now have an organisation on campus called Cops Off Campus. And I'm going to invite them to come and say a few words. And actually,
Hi everyone, so I want to thank you all for coming out today, and I go to the University of Manchester. I'm in my first year and I'll talk a bit about what I've experienced so far. Students of colour face so much discrimination throughout their entire academic careers, so when I arrived at uni, I initially had high hopes this would change. Manchester promotes itself as one of the most ethical universities in the UK. It wins social responsibility awards, it lambasts itself as a beacon of equality and acceptance, but as you can guess, my hopes are very quickly dashed. Just take the violent racial profiling of a student outside his own homes by security guards who thinks that being black is equatable to being a criminal. And obviously this would make me scared beyond words. These are people who patrol our homes, our rooms, they have access to everything. And how did the university respond to this? How did they deal with an incident that served as the boiling point of the underlying racism that pervades their institution? Did they reach out to students and reassure them that steps are being taken to ensure their safety? Did they? No. Correct. Did they speak to students of color to understand how they were feeling after seeing someone like them get basically beaten outside their own home just for being of color? Another correct answer. Did they show a zero-tolerance attitude to racism in any way on campus?
No.
Correct, again. So what did they do? Of course they made things worse. As many of you may know, although the university doesn't want you to know, our university works with Greater Manchester Police to set up patrols around our campus. It's almost laughable that our senior management is so tone deaf, they think that it's okay to buddy up with an institution who are lethal in the most literal sense of the word to people of colour. And I don't think many of you understand just how terrifying it was for me the first time I walked outside my room and saw police officers swarming around my accommodation. What kind of message do you think it sends to university students? To some of you, having police on our campus might not seem a big deal. You might think that students have brought this upon themselves by partaking in antisocial behaviour, breaking coronavirus regulations. You might think that police are there to protect us. You might think that if students haven't done anything wrong, they haven't anything to hide. To those of you who think that, I'd like to read a list of names of people who have died in police custody. You've got Kingsley Burrell, who died in a psych unit in 2011 of cardiac arrest while being physically restrained by police. I want you to think of Sheku Bayo, who died in 2015 after 6 officers kneeled and lay over him for 5 minutes. I want you to think of Sarah Reed, who was found dead in a prison cell after being assaulted by police officers in 2015. I want to read a list of other names of victims of racism, both of the police and of the institutional racism upheld in our country. We've got Shukri Abdi, Belly Majinga, Sasha Johnson, David Iluale, Christopher Alder, Sean Rigg, Roger Sylvester, Stephen Lawrence, Sarah Reed, Simeon Francis, David Emmanuel, Z. Mohammed Dale, Joy Gardiner, Trevor Smith, Jimmy Benga, Terry Gross, Dalian Atkinson, the list goes on. And now, after that, I want you to look me in the eye if you think all these things, and I want you to try and rationalise just how on earth anyone could think it's a good idea to work with police who are so violent towards any minority they don't like the look of. I want you to understand how ridiculous it is that all this is happening. You can imagine the kind of toll this has taken on my mental health, of course. Since coming to university, I'm the most depressed and the most anxious that I've ever been. Despite having medical and psychological treatment, I've had panic attacks, depressive episodes, I've been hospitalised. And while this isn't because of the police, it's definitely not, by any stretch of the imagination, making it better. We've petitioned for the universities to get rid of the police presence on campus. We've tried to explain to them about the palpably dire impact this is having on students like me. They've ignored and antagonised us at every single turn, not even bothering to meet with us. Not to be a dead horse or anything, but I'm getting the impression they don't really care about students of colour. Now, if this year has proven anything, it's the students are fed up of this kind of treatment. Take a look at the fences protest, the tower occupation, the formation of cops off campus. This is direct student-led action. We're showing the university, the senior management, that we're not standing for this anymore. This is why I'm so happy to see so many of you here today. It really fills my heart with joy to know the same people are there to look out for us, because clearly the people who are meant to look out for us aren't going to do it. So students who formed the organisation Cops Off Campus, which I'm a part of, some of them are out here, shout out to you guys. And we are trained legal observers. We're there to protect the rights of students, to make sure that security and police aren't abusing their powers as they are so want to do. To clarify, as you can probably guess, we are not on the side of security or police. We're students protecting other students, because clearly no one else is going to. And anyways, to wrap up, we're all going to keep fighting together until change happens, so I hope you'll all join us. Thank you for coming.
Thanks so much for that. And just as a show, when you read out the names, they're only a very, very small list, just how important our organisation is and our movement is, and the battle continues. So I want to introduce my next speaker. It's Rena Woods, who's the regional convener of UNISA. She's been patiently waiting, so I want to give you all a welcome.
Hello, Manchester. I'm very proud to have been asked to represent Unison North West region, the biggest region and the biggest public sector trade union. You know, and I think it's interesting that the establishment refer to us as woke. But what do I say to that? We're not woke, we are wide awake. We are wide awake to the racism that the establishment perpetrates against our communities. A policewoman says, "Oh, I mistook my gun for a taser." That policewoman wants to kill that black man. That's the reality. People see the black communities as second citizens who have no value, who are there to be ordered about. That is the reality.